Hey everyone, my name is Dana. Welcome to my studio. I'm a artist living in New Bedford, and today we're going to talk about hand building some flower vases for Mother's Day. And just going to talk you through the process and show you what I've been working on. The process that we're going to use today is kind of using slabs, and what we're going to do is we're going to roll out the clay and we're going to put some texture into it, and then we're going to kind of put them together. I'll just show you some different things that I've worked on. When you work with slabs, you can do different things like serving trays. You can do like food trays or soap dishes, for instance. I like to keep things kind of rustic, handmade quality. In this here, I do different I'm always trying different techniques. I'm in the process of kind of learning about the medium. As you can see here, you can use different things to press into the material. I used an old doily that I found at a thrift store. Again, just trying different processes. I like the idea how the material starts out soft and in the end it hardens, and so kind of working on different types of lines and shapes. This here, I used an old meat tenderizer to texture the piece, so always trying different things. I like how kind of things look really kind of organic. I'm really trying more for the fine art aspect of making pottery. This here, also trying to work on size, so trying to create larger elements. Same thing, using just kind of a meat tenderizer to kind of give her different textures and shapes. This is the last piece that I worked on. And this is what it looks like after you bisque the piece. And when you bisque it, you put it in the kiln for the first time, and it sucks all the moisture out of the clay. And what that does is that allows it ready to have glaze applied to it. It'll absorb better and stay on the piece. So anyways, let's get started. What we're gonna do is come on over here, and what you'll need to do to get started is you'll use a rolling pin, and I have these two pieces of wood here, and these are about a quarter of an inch thick. So what they're going to do is they're going to allow me to kind of have the piece that I'm rolling out to be consistent. So I have my clay all ready, and essentially I kind of put it down in shape, and I'm going to kind of roll it out. I kind of do it easy at first. So that way it kind of makes it a little bit more consistent. I keep kind of flipping it around until I get it kind of the thickness that I want. And this all kind of comes with practice. The more you get to learn about the material, this piece in particular is kind of soft, so it's a little bit more fluid. Sometimes for this process, it's a little bit easier if the clay is a little bit harder. It's a little bit more responsive. So once I kind of get it to the thickness that I want, I can bring it over here, and then I take a rib, and what the rib is good for, it kind of helps keep the clay really kind of consistent, and it kind of helps, I guess, formulate the clay. It also prevents it from cracking in the drying process, so that helps. So you just use a rib, and you kind of smooth it all out, and then at this point, this is where I can use different textures. So this is the doily that I talked about. You know, I could put that on it and roll that in to kind of give it some texture. Just kind of nice, kind of neat design. There's other things you can use. This is kind of like a wood grain. They sell these at pottery stores. This is a piece of wood with some rope on it, just to kind of give it some texture. This is the old meat tenderizer, and I like it because, you know, being an artist and creating, I like kind of inconsistencies and trying different things, and so kind of gives me some variables where I'm, you know, not stuck into one kind of process, and through that I'm kind of making new discoveries. So anyways, once I've textured out the piece, we can come on over here, and you can see that I've already laid out some pieces. And what I do is when I'm going to be hand building a piece, I roll out my slabs the night before, and I kind of lay them on a board, and I cover them with plastic. And so at this point, when I come in the next day, they're a little bit more pliable, a little bit easier to handle. These are still a little bit soft, but what I can do is I have different pieces of foam and stuff that I can stick inside the piece as I'm building it to kind of keep it shaped. So anyways, when you get going on a flower vase or any kind of structure that you want to make, there's different ways that you can do it. I like to kind of work in organic kind of fashion, but some people when they're beginning, they might feel more comfortable working with templates. So these are different shapes that you could kind of cut out and kind of put together. So you can kind of put them on and kind of trace them out. If you want to plan it out ahead of time, if people are making coffee cups or some things in particular, sometimes when you're a beginner, it's helpful to have templates. As I learned about the medium, I found it to be a little bit limiting, and I always found that I kind of like change as I go, and so I like to keep things kind of organic. So to get started, here's my clay. This is what's called slip, and this is just watered down clay, and we use that. It acts as like a glue that as we combine the pieces together, it just helps them really kind of stick and help prevent cracking as you go, as the piece dries. And then these are different tools that I use. These are like scoring tools. They come in various shapes. Some are wood, some are metal. And these tools here, this is good. This is like just a wooden knife, but you could use like little plastic children's tools or anything that you find that can kind of help blend the clay. But I use these as I go to kind of blend the surface together, kind of blend in the seams. Other things that I like to use, these are different tools for like mark making. I use this for a lot of my pottery, for craft fair pottery, just something I found at Michael's. And this is a tool that I probably my favorite tool that I use, and it's just like a grater. It's like a cheese grater. And once the process once the piece kind of dries, I come back and I'm able to kind of trim away, and I feel that it's just kind of a soothing part of the process that I enjoy, the shaping. So anyways, so let's get going. I'm just gonna do it the style that I do it. Talk to you about these templates that you can use, but so to make a flower vase, there's no set way to do it. Essentially, you need, you would think principle you would do like 4 walls and a bottom, but maybe you just want to do 3 sides, or maybe you want the piece to be round. So for those purposes, I'm going to do 3 walls, and I'm just going to cut some kind of different shapes that I like, and I'm going to make it kind of wide. So I don't like doing templates, because as I rolled it out, I kind of like how that might be a nice top. So this right here is going to be the first piece that I worked on. And what I learned that with the process that I do it is I've textured both sides. So that way when you look into the piece now, you'll see additional texture. And what I find is that I'm able to kind of hide mistakes or imperfections, and I just kind of work that into my piece. So once I have my first piece, I'm going to kind of lay it out and kind of measure up where maybe the next piece would go as far as the height. And so then I can kind of use that as kind of a guide. And then with this here too, I always use, always keep my scraps, because I don't know, when they're going to come in handy later. So if these are my first 2 pieces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of combine them together. And you can take a scoring tool. And essentially it's pretty easy, it's pretty straightforward. So what the scoring does is essentially it opens up the clay where you're going to combine it. So it kind of makes it a little bit more porous. So wherever the 2 edges are that I'm going to combine, what I would do is kind of score both edges like that. So I'm going to take this piece now, and I'm going to kind of score the side piece, knowing that when I put it together, they're going to kind of adhere. So once I do that, I'm going to take my slip, and like I said, this kind of acts as a glue. It's reclaimed clay. I ran it through a little hand blender that I had to smooth it out. So essentially, I'm going to kind of lay it down here. And what you'll find is that based on the dryness of the clay, it's really going to kind of stick together. So once I do that, this is my bottom and this is going to be my top. So I'm going to kind of line these pieces up like this. I guess I should have done the other way with it. But so as you can see that as the clay has kind of dried out all night, it's a little bit more easier to handle. What you can do too is I have little pieces of foam that I can use, that I can kind of set it there to kind of help combine it, you know, kind of keep its kind of shape as you get going. But so once I get my pieces together, here's my seam. What I'm going to do is I take clay. This is similar to what it's a little bit more moist. It's what I use to just roll out over there. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of it and I'm going to roll out what's called a coil. And what you do is essentially you start in the middle of the piece and you kind of just very gently roll it out to kind of keep consistencies. So I get it. You don't need a really thick piece. You know, just anything probably about that thickness is usually pretty good. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it in the seam and kind of press it in very gently. And what this does is that wherever you kind of combine the two pieces, it's the same thing when you're making when you're putting a handle on a coffee cup. It's the same thing. It becomes a weak spot, and so essentially you have to add clay, and typically it's much better if the clay is a little bit moist, more moist than what you're applying it to, because of the way in which it shrinks. And so if you get cracks in your clay when it's drying, that's because whatever you added was drier than what you were combining. So anyways, once I put that little piece on, I'm gonna kind of just blend it in. And you just kind of want to support the back side of it. And you can see here. And what this does is just add a little added strength. And so I really kind of blend it in so that way there's no kind of seams in it. And this is where I also can use my different tools that I have to just kind of shape it in. And since this is the inside of the piece, we're not really too concerned about how it looks per se, but we're gonna just structurally, we want it to kind of come together. So once I do that, now I have the outside that I want to kind of focus on. And this might be easier to either do it here, or I can wait until I have it stood up, have it all together, and kind of do the outside pieces. So that's what I'll do. So I'm gonna keep my foam in here, and you can see how it kind of fits the shape. I cut this stuff all the time to just kind of fit in, but what we're going to do is we're going to do our next piece now. So I'm just going to keep this up so it doesn't fall. So we're going to put a piece here. So I'm going to come on over here. I'm going to just kind of cut this kind of randomly, just like that, just to kind of feel the shape. I'm going to kind of look at it. And for me, I like that things are not always consistent. For you, you can always use a tape measure if you want and figure out exactly, what measurement you want. But for me, I like how things kind of just come together, so I'm going to use a little inconsistencies there. So what I'm going to do is, even with the width, you could do the same thing and say, okay, this is 3.5 inches there and 5 inches there, and you can do the same thickness, or you can just kind of guesstimate whatever it is that you're desire. So anyway, so once I do this, I'm gonna do the same process. I'm gonna score the edge, and then I'm gonna score the edge that I'm gonna connect it to. I'm gonna take my slip here. I'm gonna run down the edge. One thing you can do with a slip is that if it's really blended in good, you can use a little squirt bottle, a little mustard bottle or something. And that works really good to kind of apply the slip. But anyway, so then once I do that, I'm gonna take my piece, line it up with the bottle, and just kind of press it in. I'm gonna smooth out the glue there, the slip, and the same thing on the inside. And so as you can see, now we're starting to build our flower vase. We have our 3 walls so far. I'm gonna do the same process. I'm gonna roll out a coil. And I just found that as I go with this process, that if these are certain steps that if I stick to, then I kind of, my biggest enemy being a self-taught potter is that, everything was trial and error. And even today when I'm, making my own glazes or working through different techniques, it's always a learning process. And for me, I enjoy that. I enjoy that it's not such a restrictive process. And so I think, just like any kind of art, especially when you're doing it for yourself, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's what works for you. And I've watched a lot of different videos on YouTube and different techniques. There's always people that are, really helpful in showing how they kind of put things together. So now that we're gonna put this, the last wall on, we can see that it might be helpful to have something kind of in here to kind of help support the piece. So that's where I can use these different pieces here. I can kind of build it up, different pieces of foam. You can use different sponges, for instance. So something like that will at least get us close, I think, today for, just showing for demonstration example. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of score these pieces here. And that way it'll allow us to put this top piece on. Before I do the slip, what I'll do is just kind of measure out a piece. And we can say it's gonna be here. Guess how we can do it. Just kind of keep it simple, and what I'll do is just kind of draw a line underneath just to kind of show me where it wants to go. Anyway, so I'm going to just cut that. And then the same thing, so now that we know where it's going to go, we're going to take a piece and we're going to kind of score the lines. Okay, so that way, and I can kind of dry fit it to kind of show where I want it. I can see how it's kind of like sagging down a little bit in there. So what I could do is maybe adjust that sponge a little bit. And then what I can do is just kind of add some more pieces there just to kind of help the clay kind of keep its shape until it dries out. As it dries slowly, you'll be able to work with it a little bit more. So what I would do is I would put this together tonight or today, and then I would come back in tomorrow and then be able to kind of rework the piece and kind of handle it a little bit better. But anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to combine this piece here, and I'm going to set that one on top, and I'm going to set this piece here and just kind of press it in together. I'm going to kind of smooth out the glue. Now at this point, it's really kind of fragile. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to stand up the piece. I'm going to stand it up like this. And now essentially the piece is just kind of, it's together, it's just kind of stitched together. And so now what I need to do is kind of roll out these coils and fill up these other seams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the inside first and finish those. So I'm just rolling out a coil, and I'm going to lay it down. And what I also found is that when I lay in these coils, it's really important to go over these seams and really kind of combine these pieces. Because as they dry and as they go through the firing process, they'll be more likely to crack. So I don't know if you can see inside here, but what I'm doing is I'm just kind of combining the clays, the two halves together. Kind of combining that. I have a couple more seams to do. And then I'll show you an example of what you can do on the outside. It's the same thing. You can just kind of roll this out. And then essentially what you're trying to do is you're just trying to blend in the material. And seams are really important, as I said before, because these will be the first things that crack in the drying process. So I'm just kind of combining the clay. And I had texture it, when I texture the slab itself, that makes this process a little bit easier for me because I'm not worried about inconsistencies or imperfections. For me, that's going to kind of add to the piece. So I don't worry too much about the process. I just kind of go with it and make new discoveries as I go. But you know, once you do that, you can use different tools, anything that kind of has a flat edge, and you can kind of smooth it out. This is where, as I go later on, once the piece dries, I'll be able to use this to kind of do some shredding and some different shaping. Kind of as I get a little bit more familiar with the piece. You know, so I spend time with the pieces that I work with. So anyways, here's another seam. So what I'm going to do is roll out a coil. And a little bit more. So yeah, so now I'm just kind of blending it in. I'm just using my finger, but you know, it's one thing you could do is you could use a tool, you know, so you can just kind of blend it in. And essentially, you're just using different mediums of the clay, you know, different clays that are, you know, the slip is really moist, and then the slab is a little bit drier, and then there's coils. The coils are kind of at the clay temperature or the clay moisture where it's really sticky, and so it really makes a good kind of combining agent. But again, I don't typically finish a piece in one setting. I'll kind of, you know, do it over the process of a couple days, just because the more that this dries, the easier it is to handle. Right now it's really kind of soft, but when I come in tomorrow, it'll be really kind of steady or sturdy enough where I can kind of pick it up where it wouldn't kind of lose its shape. But anyway, so essentially we're just I'll put a bottom on it for you so you can kind of see how that process goes. Since it's really kind of fragile, I'm gonna kind of stick my foam back in it. So that way it kind of keeps its shape. And you know, for the video's sake, I'm doing a little bit faster than what I would normally do, but at the same time, it kind of at least shows you the process of how I do it. So anyways, with this here, I ran out of pieces that I prepped. So either I could use different pieces and kind of seam the bottom. So that's one thing that I could do. Or if we go back over here, this is good, you know, certainly good enough to use. So what I'm going to do is just kind of cut me out a piece and bring it over here. And you can see here, I can just kind of line it up. Now this clay is really moist, so I could essentially just stick it right on and it would go on very nicely because it's just like the coils. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just kind of shape it out. And you can see how this is, you know, this is a little bit drier than this stuff. So this is just going to go on really nicely. I don't need slip. If I do too much slip, then it'll be too moist, and it won't kind of hold its texture. So you can see here now it's just really nice density where it kind of blends in really nicely. So once I get the bottom on, what I can do is kind of stand the piece up, and now I can kind of work around the piece. You can see here's another seam that needs to be, need a coil on it. So what I'll do is I'll roll out a coil. And like I said, here's where you kind of go on top. This is where it can crack through the drying process and when you fire it. And so it kind of was a hard lesson to learn, but what I did is I have to make sure that seam is really kind of blended in good with some fresh clay. But yeah, with this here, the clay is nice and soft that I use for the coil, so I can just kind of use my thumb to blend it in good. So that's kind of a good seam, and you can see how it's kind of, you know, it's kind of thick. And so when I come in tomorrow, that'll be a little bit drier. So the first thing that I would do is whatever texture I'm kind of using, I would use another texture for the seam so that way it kind of blends in. But like with this here, this is a great little tool. I can kind of give it some kind of blending in mode. You know, or what I could do is I can use my meat tenderizer and take this here, and this is what I would do, is I would kind of go back over the seam. It kind of helps combine the elements a little bit, combine these two pieces, adding a little bit more texture. And then, like I said, then I would also come by and kind of trim this up and really kind of shape it. For me, this is what I enjoy. I enjoy how the medium becomes, it's almost like as it dries out a little bit more, it becomes like wood in a way, and it's almost like you're using a hand planer. But anyway, so I love this kind of process of just kind of like hand shaping. And this is where I don't worry too much about the inconsistencies. I try to think about how the piece looks to me, how it kind of feels. I like how it can be expressive, and I think, you know, from childhood, it's the whole idea that it's, you know, it doesn't have to be right or wrong. It's more about what I'm experiencing with the piece. So essentially, that's just a quick version of a flower vessel. Hopefully it's been helpful, and like I said, I did it kind of quickly, but this is essentially the style in which I work. So anyways, happy Mother's Day, and I hope it's been helpful. Thanks very much.